Hello, everybody. It is Jason from Con+3, and I am here today with Brian from Filligree Forge. How are you doing today, Brian?
Doing great. Hello.
Wonderful. So, we're going to have a chat about Everyone today, as we're giving away a few sets of that for the con. So, Everyone is based off the Barbarians of Lemuria rule set, which Filligree Forge they've done their sort of mythical version, they've published that. So, what made you to decide to do a universal book for that rule set rather than branch off and make your own rule set entirely?
You know, um, it it had so many elements to it that were easily switchable, easily modifiable and hackable in a way that a lot of other games simply aren't. People were already doing it one way or another. I after I played my third game of Barbarians, I was like, boy, I could probably use this to run science fiction. I could probably use this to run something else. But I'm also a little bit lazy. And if somebody could present to me all those rules in one place, for science fiction artifacts and for firearms and vehicles, those kinds of things, it really makes it possible to take that basic rule set in that mythic world, and really expand it to play in whatever world you can imagine.
Mm. And the game is literally, or it could literally be for anywhere, any setting, any world, any part of history you want.
Absolutely. All the basics are there in the core rule book. It also comes with, I think, two or three different scenarios that
That's
show
right.
you how you can specifically, for example, create fantasy races, which,
Mm.
are not, covered as part of the core rules. It explains how they did it, so you can do it yourself. Um, and there are numerous published settings, I guess is what we would call them, that allow you to play in a sort of a, dark. I don't want to. I want to use the right words here, like vampiric type Victorian environment, if you want. We actually played a modern day supernatural setting in the southwest of England that was especially fascinating for me since I knew nothing about the southwest of England. Um, but they're all out there, and more are coming. So if you want to play fantasy, you can play fantasy. If you play science fiction, you can play science fiction. You can play in the Wild West. You can play in the Weird West. I've run it using World War II scenarios. And a little project that I'm working on is there's an old game called Time Tripper from a company called SPI from back in the day, about some soldiers that find themselves accidentally traveling through time. And I've been
Mm.
able to use everyone to very good effect to run that world, which is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. And I was always faced with too much complexity, and this really sort of boils it down for you. So you just have fun.
Mm. So, speaking of complexity, yeah, there is a little bit of crunch in the rules, but yes, it is still quite streamlined and easy to pick up. So, could you give us a little rundown of how it works for those who aren't familiar with this rule set?
Sure. It's in a lot of ways the basic idea. If you've ever played Barbarians of Lemuria, you'll have a very good heads up on how to play everyone, because everyone adds complexity to the existing structure. But in a nutshell, you're taking your attributes in a non-combat situation and adding them to your career bonuses, and you're rolling two dice, 2d6, to see if you can get a 9 or more. And that's how it would happen. And then if you're fighting, you use a different set of attributes, and you don't involve your career. But the careers are really where you can really make the game shine. So many games have these long lists of skills and feats, and it just can become a bit cumbersome.
Yeah.
With this, you start out with 4 careers, and it's kind of fun. You create your persona in a very short amount of time, and then it has a positive uh, actual mechanical impact on how you play the game. It isn't just fluff. It's going to affect your rolls.
Mm. Sure.
So nine or more on 2d6. That's the base.
Okay. Um, does that base ever move around? So, are there still things like penalties or bonuses that you can add to that?
There are certainly in combat, for example, you might be faced with a task difficulty if somebody's in cover.
Yeah.
Um, and if you are able to bring in a boon or a flaw, which are generated mostly during character creation, but can also be added due to events in the game or to your use of experience as you advance. Those can give you advantage, which would be rolling, extra dice to see if you could succeed in your task, or they could give you disadvantage. If you are somebody who doesn't like loud noises, gunfire is going to be a problem for you,
Mm.
and you're going to be constantly at a disadvantage when you use a firearm. Doesn't mean you can't use a firearm, but you will be at a disadvantage.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
that's something that I think appeals to gamers like me who do like a little bit of crunch. If I'm hiding behind a wall, I want that to matter.
Yeah.
And you can streamline it down to where it doesn't matter, but I prefer it to matter. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
suppose you could say you're kind of you're using some mechanics to help reflect what's going on in the environment and what's around you.
that's exactly right.
Yeah. Having said that, you have also added a couple of extra options compared to regular Lemuria. So magic, for example, there's a few more bits in there that people can use. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, it's interesting in Barbarians of Lemuria, you could play a sorcerer, a wizard, but because it came from the fiction of the original Barbarians of Lemuria game, it was implied that you would always be sort of evil, you know,
Okay.
and everyone has done away with that with the introduction of arcane points that allows somebody to be, a little bit magical or very magical, um, depending on what kind of character you want to play. Are you an elf with a few cantrips available to you, or are you a mighty wizard who has spent their entire life focused on this? And so the use of the arcane points is a good way to reflect that. You could also introduce psionic points if this world doesn't have magic, but it does have telekinetic powers. For example, you could use the psionic points. And the last sort of optional and important thing is resolve, which is it reflects your will, so that you
Mm.
could play um, you could be an investigator seeking out eldritch tomes and suffering, resolve damage from the things that you find, that
Mm.
kind of thing.
Okay. Would you say because it's something that's completely universal and you can, play it in any setting you want, for a GM that prefers to kind of have some stats to work with, say if they wanted to create a load of monsters, what tips would you give GMs who had that potential obstacle in front of them?
Oh, well, I think the easiest thing to do is to look at the examples first. That's what I did. I looked at the examples and the scenarios in the book to see, what is it that I'm trying to create? Am I trying to create a token orc? What does that look like to me? And you can then decide, because you've got essentially, um, in most games you generally have, you have the orc, and then you might have maybe a boss orc, right?
Yeah.
In everyone, you have the idea, that the concept of this sort of cannon fodder, these minions who are um, very easily destroyed but can attack you in large numbers. All right, so that's one form of the orc that you'd be creating, and then you've got your toughs and your villains who are progressively harder, and a villain is almost at the level of a PC, so you got to be careful how you use them. So I would say have an idea in your head of what you want that creature to do and how strong do you want it to be, and then just simply assign the numbers along that idea. And then there's something here, that I think works. Some people feel that maybe it's a little bit extra complexity, but there's the idea of scale.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
If you've got an elephant, it's a very large creature,
Mm.
and yeah, that should have an effect on the game. And you can include that if you want to use that rule, and everyone you can include the scale, so that if somebody is, firing at a plane or throwing a spear at an elephant, it is reflected in the rules.
Cool. Okay, and yeah, you mentioned that there are a lot of different setting books or splat books available, and I was having a look on Drive-Thru, and there are plenty. I particularly like the look of the cyberpunk one, actually, and there are a lot of other sort of sci-fi settings like the incoming transmission series I noticed that had quite a lot of different extra rules and things. What is your favorite published setting so far that you've done?
My favorite published setting is probably The Colony, which is a post-apocalyptic setting because I wrote it. Uh, I do think it is quite good, and I hope you'll check it out.
Mm.
But if I had to pick another one, boy, there are some very good ones. It is actually very hard to pick a good one. The Neon Punk Crisis that you mentioned is fantastic. Blood Sundown for Western scenarios is amazing, and it was one of the first ones that I play tested with Filligree. And Red Venus is really interesting. It's like it's an alternate history where the Russians landed on the moon first, and is all the things that happened because of that. And it's just a blast. It's well written, and it's really cool to check out. I think a lot of these are fun to read in addition to being useful settings for your game.
Hmm. Are there any that you know of that are coming out fairly soon, or ones that you know are in the works, or any that you're writing?
Um, I've written a scenario that takes place in the South Pacific, kind of a weird War II scenario that may be appearing at some point. But I know that they will be publishing Dogs of War, which would allow you to play kind of Magnum PI, James Bond type heroes in a sort of a military A team, that kind of thing. Sort of a more military approach. It's Dogs of War came out years ago, and now it's being updated for everyone. And I think that's something that everybody should be looking out for. It's going to be a big hit.
Hmm. Cool. That sounds brilliant. Okay, just to wind down there, I've just got one fun question left for you, Brian. So if you had to do a mashup of two completely different settings for a new publication, what would those two settings be, and how would they work together?
Whew.
Kind of like a cocktail.
Two completely different settings. Let's see here. Maybe some Victorian crime fighting and some science fiction dinosaur-based science. It'd be a good combination.
Yeah, I can kind
Something
of
along
see Tyrannosaurus Rexes running down the streets of London. That sounds good.
Sure.
Or mechanical dinosaurs. Awesome. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to me today, Brian, and thanks very much for coming on and sponsoring us this year. We're really grateful for that.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Take care, Jason. Thanks. Hello, my name is Brian Willey. I'm with Filligree Forge in the United States outreach, and I'm here with Jason Green talking about the Butterfly Project, which is a school in Uganda that educates children who are living in poverty and in isolated villages, and they use gaming to do this. They have board game clubs. They run tabletop RPGs like Pathfinder and do LARPs. And every year they do an online con to help raise money. So I hope that you will contribute and give us a listen.